Hi, my name is Cheryl Nomanson, and I'm a staff technical trainer for SolarWinds. Today, I'm going to take you through a very high-level overview of the architecture of SolarWinds and how to scale your SolarWinds self-hosted deployment. We're going to begin by just drawing out the main, what we call centralized deployment. And a centralized deployment means you have one SolarWinds observability server. You can have a lot of scaling options, such as polling engines in HA, but you have one SolarWinds server. So we're going to start there. Your SolarWinds server, we'll put that right here. The SolarWinds server is also called, in the context of scaling conversations, the main polling engine, or MPE. So we're going to say SolarWinds as a SolarWinds server, also the main polling engine. Without any kind of scaling options, this does all of the polling in addition to providing you all the functionality of the software. Now, with that SolarWinds server, for observability, you have 3 databases. You have the primary SolarWinds database. We'll say primary database. You have a logs database for syslogs and traps and such. And then you also have a flow database for flows. So it's connected to each of these databases. You also have functionality of a web server. So this is the web console interface. And that is built into the SolarWinds server. So that's how your users access the software and manage the entities. And then in this deployment, you also have all of the monitored entities. And these would be things like nodes, volumes, interfaces, servers, applications, VMs, and such. It's all of the entities that you're pulling. Now, this SolarWinds server or main polling engine is pulling all of these things. So it's right into the database, it's providing web console interface for the users, and it's pulling entities. So we would call this just our centralized single server deployment. So you look at this and you keep adding entities to monitor. You may be asking, okay, when am I going to add a polling engine? Because at some point you do need to add a polling engine. And you will reach a point where this server cannot pull all of the entities you want it to monitor, especially without sacrificing performance and having other issues. So when do you add that? Now you'll see in our documentation, you'll see a lot of numbers like 12,000 of these or 10,000 of that. Those numbers are estimates. They've never been designed to be absolute numbers. And it's not possible for us to give you absolute numbers. And there's a number of reasons why. Not the least of which is that not all polling is created equal. Not all node polling is equal. There's other environmental factors, even what protocol you're using. Are you using SNMP version 3? We found that that has a little bit more impact or weight on the polling engine than version 2 used to. Are you pulling application components? So even if you had 2 users that had the exact same node, they're still not going to be equal, or you can't guarantee that they will. User 1 may just be using the default pollers. They did network discovery, we assigned pollers to that node, and then go off and pull, and they don't add anything else. User 2 may be watching the exact same node. Say it's a router. They've built 6, 7, universal device pollers or new pollers for new entities, plus they're using Network Insight. So now their polling load is higher than user 1, but it's the exact same node. So to give you a node or an element count as to saying this is the absolute number of entities that you can monitor, we can't do because there's too many contextual and environmental differences. Now, we go into that a lot more in the SolarWinds Academy classes. So you'll see those numbers. They're good numbers. They're very good ballpark numbers. They give you an idea on average. How much can one polling engine handle? How much can another one handle? How many of these types of entities? So instead of relying on those numbers, which again are good estimates, we have built into the software in the settings an ability to look at your environment and gauge where you are, given all the factors of your environment, in needing to get a polling engine. That's called a polling threshold. And you can find it in the details area in settings. You'll have polling engines. And you can find those numbers there. And you will have that for every one of your pollers, your main polling engine, and any of your additional pollers. So you can make sure that none of them are exceeding this threshold. So what this polling threshold does is it looks at your environment and it says, okay, here's where you are in percentage based on how you're monitoring and what you're monitoring. Now, it isn't really all that important until you get up around 85%, right? When you get to 85%, let me grab another color here. When you get out to 85%, we're going to give you a warning. Basically, it's the software kind of tapping you on the shoulder saying, you're starting to get a little high. You're fine. Everything's fine. But you're starting to get a little high. Okay, so you get a warning that shows up in any of your warning or any of your event type widgets. You'll see that warning there. It comes in yellow, being the warning color for the SolarWinds platform. And then, though, when you reach 100% or beyond, because you can actually exceed 100%, we start to get a little more insistent. That message turns red. If you've ever taken classes from me, you'll know that I always say red is bad. Anytime you see red, red is bad. Okay, it will turn red. And you will also get an alert fired. If you have email configured, you're going to get an email for it. This alert is turned on out of the box. You may not have realized that. That's telling you you've hit this 100%. And one of the reasons why we get insistent, not the least of which is you're probably going to start seeing performance issues, is because we will start adjusting the polling intervals on the back end to kind of help try to balance the performance and preserve the function of the server. Now, that will not show up in your polling intervals. Those numbers won't change because it's very dynamic. But know that your polling intervals are being changed on the backside. So we will start to get more insistent with you. And again, we talk a lot more about these things in the classes. But this polling threshold is what you're going to want to look at. Let's say you're at 85% and you're thinking about adding, a couple thousand nodes and you don't have a polling engine. Maybe you're going to stop and reconsider that. You might not add all 2,000 at once, or you may just go ahead and deploy a polling engine before you add them. So we're trying to help you mitigate the situation so that you don't reach this 100% mark, okay? So let's say that you are going to go ahead and implement some polling engines. Wonderful. I'm just going to put 2 polling engines into this for the sake of our diagram. You can deploy up to 100 polling engines per SolarWinds server that is supported. So let's say we got a polling engine here. And we'll just put another polling engine right here. Okay, 2 polling engines. Model would be the same, however many that you have. Okay, now, just because you deploy polling engines doesn't mean that you have to stop monitoring with the SolarWinds server. Some people do. Some people don't. There's really nothing automatic about how these polling engines are added. We don't automatically move nodes or anything like that. But what that means is that you can deploy these polling engines in whatever way makes sense to you. We have people deploy them for purely architectural reasons. They don't want to try to pull across long distances from the main polling engine, so they put a polling engine at a location. We have people deploy them because they need to scale outward and they move some nodes off to that. Or they say, you know what, my SolarWinds server is fine with what it's monitoring, but every entity that we add from this point forward goes to one of these polling engines. And again, you can monitor the polling threshold on both of these to make sure that you're also not exceeding these numbers. So how you deploy these polling engines is pretty much up to you, but you can deploy them in whatever sense makes sense for you in your environment. Okay, and up to 100 of these are supported per SolarWinds server. So once again, all of this and the architecture and setting these up and a lot of the details for how you deploy these, we cover this pretty in-depthly in our scaling and architecture classes in the Academy. This is just a high level of using these. The other area where we see people needing to expand is in web console users. And they either have too many web console users or they have a smaller number that just use it very heavily. Okay, so we also have an option for what we call an additional web server. So additional web server is here. Now the additional web server allows you to provide web console access to more concurrent users. Anywhere from 25 to 50 concurrent users, again, as a broad range, is supported by a single web server. But remember, just like polling, not all users are created equal. Some users are just monitoring. Some users only have one tab open. So we say it per user, but it's really per session. So if a user has 5 sessions, 5 tabs open, they have 5 sessions going. Some users are running big reports, doing discoveries, doing perf stack. So not all users are created equal. So the range is quite wide. We talk about some ways in the class to be able to identify if you need a web server. It is very, very important if you start to see performance issues in your SolarWinds server that you do not assume that you have too many users or assume that you need a polling engine. You want to make sure that you know exactly what the root cause is, because any kind of performance issue, because you interact with the web console, you're likely to see it there first. It doesn't automatically mean one thing or the other. A lot of times it is a poller, sometimes it's a web server, sometimes it's something else. Now, the nice thing about these scaling options is, of course, you can deploy them, particularly if you have the enterprise scale tier, you've already licensed them. If you haven't licensed them, you can deploy them on a 30-day eval and find out. I could deploy a web server, see if it solves my problem, if I have lots and lots of users, or if I'm an MSP. But you want to be careful that you don't assume what the root cause is, okay? So the web server allows you then to be able to expand out the number of concurrent users and sessions that you can have. One thing that you can look at just as a starting point on the main polling engine, if you suspect that you have too many users, is take a look at the IIS worker processes and see if they're consuming a lot of memory. That might be directing you that way, as needing another web server, particularly if the server is spec'd correctly, okay? So that's one thing you can look at. But the additional web server, again, there's nothing automatic about it. It doesn't load balance. You can put it in a load balancing environment, but it will not automatically do that. But you can deploy it however you want to make sense. Some people put them into DMZ. Some people say all of my partner users need to use this and all of our internals will use the SolarWinds server. Some people say, a lot of people actually say, I don't want any web console usage hitting the performance on this server, so all of my users will use the web console. It's, again, whatever makes sense for your environment is how you can deploy this additional web server. So there's a few other scaling options that we do go into in the class, such as remote collectors, but these are the ones I kind of wanted to discuss here. The other one I'm going to add on to this, just very briefly, as a high-level discussion, is high availability. Now, we offer high availability for, well, stick with orange. We offer high availability here for pollers. APE, I'll put one on each one of these. And we offer it for the SolarWinds server. Okay, so for polling engines and SolarWinds server, and you'll be saying, well, wait a minute. What about the databases? What about the web server? We don't do HA for those. On the web server, there's no data loss if this server was to go down. Not really. All the data is on the database. Okay, so this would just be a matter of reclaiming the license and redeploying. On the database side, SQL, as you may well know, has very, very good tools for redundancy and HA. So we leave that up to SQL. So what we're doing is we're filling in the gaps, saying, you don't need it here. SQL handles this, so let us do HA for the main poller and the additional pollers. Now, these can be one-to-one, as I drew here, or they can be one-to-many, and we talk more about that when we get into the Academy classes. But I'm doing a one-to-one for the diagram. So we do also offer HA. HA can be single subnet, what those of us that are kind of old school used to call side-by-side, because it literally was a physical server sitting side-by-side. Okay, so you can do a single subnet, you can do multi-subnet, which could also be a multi-location, which technically can be some lightweight disaster recovery, right? Because they're located differently. And you can do cloud as well, where your main server is on-prem and the HA is in the cloud. So there are some different deployment models that we go through as well. So we do offer the HA for this model. So basically what we're looking at here is what we call a centralized environment. And this is the most common environments that our customers have, where they have a single SolarWinds server, various numbers of APEs if needed, web server if needed, HA if needed, and all of this is communicating with this main server. There's always communication. This SolarWinds server is aware of every entity and every component in the environment, pollers, web servers, it knows they're there. Okay, so this is our centralized deployment. So outside of the centralized deployment, we also have what's called a distributed deployment. And what a distributed deployment means is that you have multiple SolarWinds servers. You either have it because you have an extraordinarily large environment where no matter how many polling engines you had, it just was too much for a single deployment. Okay, that can happen. We talk a little more about that in class, but you can get to that point. These are extraordinarily large environments. Or you have geographically dispersed locations. You have locations all over the world, and you just decided to put a SolarWinds server in each of the locations. Another one is sometimes in high security environments. Environments are isolated from each other specifically for security, so you have multiple SolarWinds servers. They may or may not communicate back through the next option that I'm going to talk about, but it is available. So that is what's called a distributed deployment. And what I'm going to do is just kind of visualize this by saying this is a site. So I'm just going to draw a box around this, like so. We're going to call this a site. And we'll say that this is site 1. Okay? And then I'm just going to draw simple boxes for 2 more sites. You can support a lot more than 2, but we'll just add 2 sites in here. So we'll say this is site 2, and this is site 3. Okay? Now, you have a SolarWinds server in each one of these. So theoretically, you have 3 web console views. But now you don't have a consolidated way, maybe from an enterprise level, to look at all your metrics across those views. So what we designed is something called the Enterprise Operations Console, or what we call the EOC. And I'm just going to put that right here. Now, the EOC is designed specifically for a distributed environment. It makes no sense to use it in a centralized environment because the EOC is designed to pull views and information together from multiple sites into a single web console view. So now I have more of a consolidated view. I can see my top 10 interface utilization across all my sites, all of my active alerts across all my sites. I can do some reporting on metrics across all of my sites, intelligent maps. There are some functionalities you can do there. However, if you start clicking and drilling into entities and trying to look at details in the EOC, you'll pretty quickly get routed to that server. You either have to log on or you can set up single sign-on or pass-through authentication. Sorry. You can set up pass-through authentication to go right into it, but you will be redirected to that server so that you can dig deeper into the data that's in the database. But it gives you an enterprise view and some tools like reporting and mapping and PerfStack that you can use at that enterprise level. But now I can see a consolidation of all of my information in a single web console interface. So that's what the EOC is designed for, and this is for those distributed deployments. So again, this is just a high-level overview of the architecture of a SolarWinds deployment and some of our scaling options. For more details on using this, please do attend these SolarWinds Academy classes for scaling and architecture. We have those on demand. We have them instructor-led. Just choose the format that you'd like. But I really hope that you found this useful. Thank you so much for watching.